So I just want to echo what folks have said in terms of it being a really wonderful opportunity to be here with many of the people that have led me to look at video in these ways. I also thought it was appropriate, maybe Fred thought about this, to go after Jason and Sarah Jane because I share some of the concerns that you mentioned at the beginning. And for me, what I wrote about in the Why Did You Start Using Video was that I always had a sense that micro moments matter. In terms of the forms of dehumanization and humanization that can happen in classroom settings, that sometimes they happen second by second or moment by moment. And I also am playing with some ideas around choreography, and so I appreciated that you brought in that video and discussed that a little bit, so I'm going to build on that. So I talked about learning to see the relational and historical dimensions of embodied interaction, partially because of the pedagogical purposes of this conference, but also because I feel like myself and the folks that I'm working with are learning to see these aspects of interaction. And I also cheated a little bit because I looked at old transcript to do your assignment, and I wasn't satisfied with how I was looking at things in the old transcript, partially because of what Chuck was talking about, which is the verbal gloss of nonverbal activity. And so I decided to show something that's in process rather than complete. So to give you a quick background on the program, this is a 3-year ethnographic project that I did in terms of the data collection, but the relationship continues, with a after-school program focused on scientific and artistic activity in the Boys and Girls Clubs in the Bay Area. And another important piece of contextual information that's going to run throughout my talk is that this was a collaborative process between the educators on the team and myself. So the educators that I worked with played a role on the research team, and I was also a part of the pedagogical design of the program. So in addition to this idea of micro moments mattering, the other thing that has really always intrigued me and kept me interested in video is the role of praxis and pedagogical praxis. So I myself have experienced a lot of growth as an educator through watching video of classroom practice. And I'm also interested in the ways that the educators that I've worked with have had a chance to slow down their interaction, kind of building on Miriam's discussion of teacher noticing, in order to be able, and my experience has actually been that watching video makes it so that certain things happen more slowly in my experience in the classroom so that I have more room to figure out how to intervene. And so I'm really interested in that connection between watching video and pedagogical development of educators. So let me tell you how this project came to be. Very quickly, there was a problem of practice that emerged in the setting that I was working in, and it involved our effort to have joint activity as an organizing principle of the program. And at times that was achieved, but often it wasn't. And so this conversation that's been going on throughout the day that Barbara's raised a few times about the unit of analysis and how we see was also a pedagogical challenge in terms of people thinking about learning as an individual. Person does this and then person does this phenomenon versus being able to see and also organize learning as a joint activity. And so that was part of the reason that we started to use photographs of embodied interaction with the educators in the setting, and also as a way to apprentice new educators in the setting who were both adults and college-age students and also high school students from the Boys and Girls Club and from the neighborhood that the club was in. And so specifically, we noticed that there was moments when educators took over for students or took objects out of their hands in ways that might not have been as productive. And we also noticed this pendulum swing between kind of adult control and hands-off. So when we would say, maybe it's good to not, then they go, oh, okay, and then they would do like hands-off, more hands-off stuff. So we were trying to get off of that pendulum and think about joint activity. And we were also interested in the ways embodied forms of assistance communicate things to learners around intelligence and capability. So whose projects get taken out of their hands more often? Who gets trusted with different tools in the setting? And how might those align with particular racialized or gendered patterns as well? So these are some of the concerns that led us to start looking at these photographs. So we took photographs from video, and we have been working to catalog all the different configurations of rich forms of joint activity. And the purpose of that, again, is pedagogical and around this apprenticeship in the sense that we were hoping that expanding our view of all the generative forms of joint activity might help when you're in the moment in real time to be able to seize upon opportunities to create that with the kids. So this is one of them, hands and eyes together. These are all instances of the person who was in the position of helping and the person that was receiving help having their gaze and their hands on the artifact or the tool at the same time. This is the second one. Their hands, our eyes. They referred to the kids. Our referred to the adults or the teens. We would talk about these photographs with the people that were in the pictures as a form of professional development. We would ask them to share about the history of the interaction. We would talk about what was productive about this configuration, when it might not be productive, when is somebody watching you helpful, when is it not helpful. And we also asked them to think about what it might feel like for the kids. So those were some of the prompts that we used. And I'll go over this quickly so we can get to the clip. Looking over another's shoulder, observation as participation was a common one. So both methodologically, once we started doing this, I started attending to these moments more in terms of what I was videotaping in the setting. So in this clip, you'll see I'm behind the camera that I notice a moment where this is happening. I notice a moment where this is happening, and I kind of move so that I can pick it up. We also, as a team, started to watch video with slightly new eyes once we had seen the still frames. So this is one way that I'm thinking about that relationship between still frames and video. Does it offer new forms of perception that might be useful pedagogically? So I'll play the video and then talk a little bit about my struggles and questions with analysis. So I'm just going to talk through a little bit of our process in terms of analyzing this currently. I do think there's some understandings that we can develop and some pedagogical usefulness to looking just at the verbal transcript. So these are some of the codes we're kind of looking at: requests for help, this language of we, when it appears, when it goes back to you towards the end, and why that is, the way that the educator is narrating while she's doing what she's doing, and then this move of showing how and then handing it back over partially unfinished. So there's some forms of assistance that we can see that we care about in the verbal transcript. But we're playing with this way of kind of describing in narration form, and maybe this goes back to the discussion of description versus transcription. So this is just one attempt. Meg was sitting close to Tanya prior to her asking for help. When she got stuck, Meg's hands came forward and she began helping her twist the wire so that Tanya could complete her circuit. The project was kept in front of Tanya in the same workspace where Tanya held it when she was working on her own. This is also a point at which I zoomed in. So there's ways I think we can pull out certain information that might be useful for educators through this kind of narration. And it's limited, going back to this question of who gets to pick the frame. But I think it does allow for some of that simultaneity of verbal and nonverbal. So we look at this moment where somebody else came for help. I'm very interested in these hands and the role that hands play. I asked Chuck earlier if hands listen. I'm really interested in how educators' hands might hold back in ways that kids' hands come forward, and that's one of the things that we're looking at, or what's going on here, what's communicated in that. And then I'm just going to go through this quickly, but some of the things I want to point out here, Ray would be mad if I didn't have Robert picking his nose. Because he's like, what's going on? I showed him once with him, and of course he was like, what's going on with that nose pick? And so I don't have that in one of the frames, but I just realized that he would want that. this moment of when she says, hang on a sec, what's interesting is that we've showed this in multiple scenarios, and some people kind of might see that as pushing him out, but he doesn't leave. He stays, and he continues to observe and kind of engage and turn his head. And then this moment of her handing it back. And then I want to go to the last moment. Almost immediately, Grace returned for more assistance. The timing of help-seeking activity may tie into the notion of a choreography of joint activity. So I'm interested in how the collective might be engaging in joint activity. I'm also interested in what we might see over the long period of time looking at video in a setting. Because this was an intervention on the part of the educators and myself to think about how to foster more joint activity, could we actually see the setting or the collective move in some ways more towards that over time? And another meaning of the word choreography, which I think has both strengths and possible limitations, is how do salient prior moments mediate current action and meaning? And then how can multiple information sources help to historicize the interaction? So I'm just going to share a couple brief things to close. And one of them is that we did look at these videos with the educators themselves. And there was some interesting things that came out of that process. And I'm curious about how we might transcribe and write with educators in a way that, and we've been doing some of this work in a way that helps to co-author the representations in ways that might be most useful to educator audiences. So these are two of the teachers talking about that moment when she takes it out of her hands, and Walter says, you took those pieces out of her hands all the way in a way that was productive because of the history you have with her. And then Meg says, that actually reframes what we've noticed about kids' eyes moving away when facilitators put their hands on their project. Up until now, we've located that in the kids, but really it's the meaning that builds over time about what's happening when the adults put their hands on the piece. And then Meg also gave more background about what was happening in that moment with Tanya. She talks about how she was feeling insecure in ways that she wasn't before. She also shares this backstory about how she knew that she was experiencing some bullying in school at the time. And she says, I can overlook her a little in this space. She's not the kind of person to beg for help or attention. She'll find something else to do. She's one of the older participants, so I don't worry about her as much, but I put a little more effort in working with her that day because she seemed a little down. And I noticed this morning that we talked a little bit about love, and we talked about it in the moment where it was really overt, when the kid was kind of hugging the teacher. And I also felt like we might have separated a little bit from what was going on intellectually, whereas I think you can see it all over the place, and I think it interweaves with the intellectual in a lot of really important ways. So Manuel Espinosa has been writing about this as educational dignity, and I think that might be a helpful concept in trying to understand some of these moments. This is just some notebooks from her. So I'm thinking about this idea of how we can be historians of the interaction in the moment. And then I wanted to end with two last quick things, which is that I told Meg it was really graceful the way she was offering help to multiple kids. And she said, it looks fluid, but it was super tense in the moment. I felt super pressured to address all the need that was surrounding me, so I don't want it to look too easy. And I really like that because I think this goes back to Fred's work on social gravity and the weight of the moment. And I wonder, how do we represent the interaction in a way that attends to the weight that teachers feel and the many things that are going on moment to moment? And the last piece is this question around visual transcripts as opportunities for aesthetic representations. So this is something that we're playing with. This is one of the images. One of the teachers on staff is an artist, and he started to play around with how we can show some of these visuals in a way that might highlight some of what's happening aesthetically. And when I say aesthetically, and this is what I'll end with, I'm thinking about the aesthetics of the representation, but I'm also thinking about the aesthetics of the experience in the moment. And Maxine Green talks about aesthetics as made by living persons for living persons. And I'm really interested in how the moment might be experienced aesthetically, and then how the representations might, similar to the way transcripts highlight certain things, is it possible for our visual representations to also draw out the beauty of the moment in those interactions? So I'll stop there. Yeah.
I'm not sure it's appropriate, but because I guess I want to kind of say some of the things this made me think about. I was really struck by your initial video. I thought it was magnificent, of the hands working together on the object. And I thought that goes in an awful lot of directions. One thing I thought about for a while is that you could re-specify human cognition as something like that. Multiple people are in the world together as they come up in that. Now, a second thing about that is the nature of, well, two things. One is that is, once you get the three of them together, all on that, slightly forward on this, is you've got things which I've been unhappy about Tomasello arguing for something like joint attention. And part of my problems with that, it's always a triadic. He doesn't care if people, he told me that, he doesn't care if people look at each other, the things. But one of the things about that is that it's done in timeless mental states. So what you do is, I can recognize that you are looking at this, and you stop at that mental state, when in fact, it's this unfolding progression of demonstration that is visible here. Now, a second quick thing on this, and you people are in education, I don't know the ed, or a lot of you are, I don't know the ed literature, but one of the things I've been unhappy, say, for instance, in seeing a presentation by Gergely, whose work I like very, very much, is that the notion of learning, or of at least experimentally learning, seemed to be sequential, in the sense that you show somebody, and then you see if the kid does it back. And what's going on here is simultaneous. And that's something what I've looked at as cooperative action. And the simultaneity, I don't know how this fits some of the other discussions, it's simultaneity from differentiated participants. One's doing one thing, one's another. This was very vivid to us in videotapes of surgery, where they're cutting flesh. And the senior surgeon is holding the flesh to be cut, and the junior surgeon is doing the cutting. So you've had the world articulated for that. And I thought you were really, really showing this with very, very vividly. One thing that may be way too far on this, but if you take the sense of looking at the environment, one thing I've been talking a bit with an archaeologist in I don't get to see him enough in Denmark, but one of the things is, it looks like the modern human beings and the modern human mind emerged during the Middle Stone Age, or just before the Middle Stone Age. And one of the real characteristics of that, I mean, linguists argued it's language, and I don't think that's right. I think, well, my own sense, I think it was cooperative action, and that language emerged. But one of the things is a great differentiation of environments. You suddenly have different groups recognizing, say, different kinds of wood in their environment, different kinds of things. So there's this progressive, socially organized ability to construe the environment in work relevant ways. And it seems that the scene you're showing is exactly how that might have been done and transformed through generations. You have people working together, focusing on something in the environment, and demonstrating precisely how the environment has to be articulated in terms of the activities of our particular community. And I just thought that was a truly, from my perspective, I don't know, maybe I thought it was just an absolutely wonderful demonstration of what it means to be human, and to inhabit each other's actions and inhabit these processes across generations. So, I don't know.
And on that note, we're moving on.
I'm sorry.
To the next presentation.